Hi there, I'm Fred Trost. Boy, I wish I could tell you that this was my opening day buck, a 16-pointer. But it was taken by lucky buck hunter Jerry Rogers from Lansing. Jerry, you have quite a story to tell about this unusual rack. We're going to hear about it right now because it's Thursday night, time for Michigan Outdoors. This is the year for big buck racks in Michigan. A lot of hunters have got their bucks, and they've got some big ones too. You'll see them next week here on our big buck contest. But this is kind of an unusual rack. Jerry Rogers, it looks like it would have been very symmetrical if it wouldn't have, gotten damaged?
Well, it had to be damaged in the velvet, yes. Probably would have been pretty close to a perfect rack had it been.
Sure is. You can see these little tines coming out down here, and the brow tines, they're symmetrical all the way up. But right here, it's almost like a shovel on a caribou.
Well, that's where it got damaged, and probably took over and grew that way.
Yeah, there's another spot right there on this antler.
It got nipped off in the velvet.
Boy.
And grew out to a point.
In fact, speaking of velvet, we can see a couple little spots on this rack right here where there's some leftover velvet he couldn't get.
Well, those horns are close, and they can't get in and probably clean it off.
Yeah, there's a couple other spots down there where there's velvet. Well, this was quite a buck. How big was it?
Oh, about 175 on the hoof, about 120 dressed out.
And was this a buck you had your eye on for a couple days?
No, I'd never seen it before. I saw 12 before this one came through, and I got up after the 10 or 12 we went through. Went to our brother's stand to get a candy bar and a cup of coffee. Had that, and then went back to the stand, and this came through about 2 minutes later.
A coffee break buck.
Yeah,
well,
right.
You could have missed this, you know that?
Very easily,
Pretty close.
Yeah, that's just once in a lifetime.
Well, what's the story here? You have a piece
I didn't
of
take out a
shoestring here.
A line to tie my tag in, so I had to cut my bootstring off.
Cut your bootstring off to tag it.
I'd do that any day for a rack like that.
Weren't you too optimistic about getting a deer?
No, just, you know.
When was the last time you got a buck?
About 12 years ago.
Boy, you sure came back with a prize winner here.
Yeah, it was time. My wife said I get the biggest areas when I go, so that's, that's the way you do it.
Well, that's terrific. This is an awfully nice buck. We'll score it out next week if you'll come back for the big buck contest.
Well, I'd like to do that.
Terrific. We'll score this out Safari Club standards and see how it stacks up against the other ones.
Fine.
Well, congratulations, Jerry. Now, Ed Groves, you have a report from the DNR on some trophy fish. Where are they right now?
Well, Fred, a lot of them don't look like trophies, and well, a lot of them don't even look a lot like fish. At this moment, the DNR's Fisheries Division has tens of millions of trout, salmon, muskie, and walleye eggs in 7 hatcheries around the state. And some of these eggs undoubtedly contain fish that someday might be here as trophies on Michigan Outdoors. Without our hatchery system, we wouldn't be able to grow so many big fish in the state. The conditions are ideal, and right now, millions and millions of eggs are incubating in the 45-degree waters of these hatcheries, and next month, the first of them will begin hatching and become fry attached to their yolk sacs. In January, their yolk sacs will be absorbed, and these little fingerlings will be fed by the hatcheries. They'll grow about a ½ an inch a month, and in a few years, some of these fingerlings will be full-fledged trophies. Who knows, maybe hanging on the fireplace in your family room. And talking about trophies, let's not forget about the DNR's Big Buck Contest. These are just some of the forms that have been returned. You can pick up entry forms at any DNR office or deer checking stations. Now, there's been some confusion that I want to clear up. No pre-registration is necessary. Even if you've already got your big buck, you can still enter. It's important that you get your forms in early if you want to appear on our Big Buck Show right here next week. Send it into the DNR or to our Michigan Outdoors address right away. We want the top 10 buck hunters, their trophy racks, and their tall tales on next week's show. But unfortunately, not all bucks are taken in a way that can be entered in the contest. Last year, almost 19,000 deer were involved in car-deer accidents, and this is the time of the year when most of those collisions occur. By county, last year's incidents ranged from a low of 4 in Keweenaw County to a high of 811 in Kent County. Our map shows areas of less than 100 accidents in white, and the darkest shade shows areas where over 600 car-deer accidents occurred. You just might be surprised at how many collisions happen in your area. How to avoid collisions with deer? Well, the most obvious and most often ignored tip is to pay heed to the deer crossing signs by being prepared to stop. Now, chances are if you see one deer, there are more deer nearby, so be alert. So, Fred, it pays to keep an eye out for those deer along the roadside.
Well, speaking of keeping a watchful eye, Ed, we have a gentleman right here who does this 24 hours a day on the DNR. Tom Washington, Executive Director of Michigan United Conservation Clubs, a group of over 100,000 sportsmen in Michigan who band together in this association to what, Tom? Defend the rights of sportsmen?
Well, really, the purpose of the organization is to educate people in the wise use of natural resources. But the reason we were founded was to keep politics as much as possible out of natural resource management.
Have you sat down on the job lately? I mean, there's a lot of politics in the DNR right now.
Well, you're talking about internal politics, or are you talking about partisan politics or outside interference from politicians? There is a difference. Certainly.
Which one is MUCC interested in?
We're interested in both of them, very frankly, and both of them almost are a full-time job.
Which is a greater threat right now, inside politics or outside?
Well, I think because of the internal politics, the outside politics are taking over, and that is certainly a threat. That's the reason we were organized some 45 years ago, to try and keep those political influences separated from management programs. But I think that politicians in general, partisan politicians in general, see a great vulnerability in the department now, and I think they're attacking.
Well, what about the situation where Charlie Gunther was denied his bumping position of wildlife chief by Director Tanner, and now he won that appeal?
Well, that's an internal thing. Mr. Gunther has gone by the rules, and he felt that the decision that the director had made violated those rules and his rights to a particular job. He challenged him and was successful.
So it turns out that Gunther was labeled as competent for the job, which brings up the question of Tanner. Did he make a bad decision? Is he competent for the DNR director's job?
Well, whether or not he's competent for the job, I don't think has a lot to do with the Gunther decision. I think the Gunther decision was one which was determined by an administrative judge and by the Civil Service Commission itself, and doesn't really have anything to do with Tanner's competency. That has to be determined by the Natural Resources Commission, who are really the employers of Director Tanner.
The commission isn't exactly what you call a sportsman's group, rallying for the cause of sportsmen. The DNR has gotten into all sorts of toxic chemicals and waste and burying the cattle for the Department of Agriculture, the state fairgrounds. What's the deal? Is the commission really representing sportsmen anymore?
Well, I think that some of those things that are responsibilities of the department are perhaps peripheral. But most of the things are certainly within the realm of responsibility of the Natural Resources Commission and the DNR. One of the big problems that sportsmen in general have all over this state and all over this nation is recognizing that unless we have a quality natural environment, unless we have clean water, unless we have clean air, unless we have proper habitat, whether it be for fisheries or for wildlife, they're not going to have any sport. And so oftentimes they think that the DNR and the MUCC, for that matter, are spending too much time on these sophisticated environmental questions, and I think they're just not seeing the forest for the trees, because we've got to tend to the home of wildlife if we're going to have wildlife, if we're going to have any hunting and fishing at all.
So you're not for a split of the DNR?
No, absolutely not.
Do you feel the sportsman has gotten the short end of the stick, though?
I think in some instances he has. I think the warm water fishery in this state, for instance, has taken the short end of the stick. I think small game in southern Michigan have taken the short end of the stick in favor of the deer program, and the warm water fishery in favor of the Great Lakes fishery program and the trout fishery.
Well, thank you, Tom. Those are subjects we can open up in the hot seat in future editions of Michigan Outdoors. Right now, let's talk about a bird that is back in Michigan, appropriate for this day, the wild turkey. I'd venture to say that most everybody ate turkey earlier this afternoon, but not too many people in Michigan had a turkey like this. This is a mounted Michigan wild turkey. Dale Davis, you're ex-president of the Michigan Wild Turkey Federation. How many wild turkeys do you suppose hunters took last year?
I think the figure was around 1,500, Fred.
So we may have had maybe 800 or 1,000 on tables
Could be.
today. Who knows? How did they taste compared to a domestic turkey?
Well, it's all in the preparation. I personally think that a wild turkey is much better than a domestic turkey because you don't have as much white meat. It is a little bit drier, but if it's prepared properly, it's excellent.
Okay, well, a wild turkey, this one in the strutting pose. We notice a long beard hanging down. That's a characteristic of the tom turkey. We'll switch over here to the domestic turkey. Vic Thurlby, you're from the Michigan State University Poultry Science Department in charge of the turkey farms. This has a very short beard, it's called, little wiry hairs out the front. So this is a tom.
That's it, Tom.
They're very unusual looking birds. Extremely loud. For example, all of this, boy, this is strange feeling stuff here too. That's just loose skin.
When they strut, that'll change different bright purple colors.
So it'll turn more blue than the red
just like
one?
the head there.
And what is this thing that looks like a night crawler hanging over its nose?
That's a snood.
The snood. What do they use that for?
That's just ornament for tom turkey.
An ornament, decoration, as it were. Okay, well, how big is a domestic turkey normally?
Well, they usually dress them out about 18 to 22 pounds.
Well, compared to wild turkeys, of course, are always dark, very dark, and the domestic turkeys we see are generally white. Why is that?
Well, they dress up nicer and they look better when they're sold
Oh, when they're
over the
plucked,
counter.
doesn't leave the pin feathers. Of course,
No
that's-
pin feathers.
Of course, that's very important. Well, Dale, speaking on the wild turkey again, let's go over to the map here and look at where the wild turkeys are in Michigan. Allegan County, of course, is where they were first introduced or reintroduced back in 1954.
That's correct.
How many did they introduce there?
Approximately 50.
And from that, there are how many down there now, do you know?
Well, not in that particular area, but statewide, there's about 15,000 birds.
Okay, we have Allegan area, the Baldwin area up here, and the largest concentration is what, in the Mayo area?
In the club country in Mile, yes.
Club country, right in northeast lower Michigan, and then there's some over here in Menominee County. They're introducing more every year, aren't they, in different locations?
Yes, the department has an active trap and transfer program.
And it works.
It's working excellently.
They spread their numbers every year. Well, Dale, you're a turkey caller from way back, and I happen to know a very excellent turkey caller. Why don't you put that diaphragm call in your mouth?
Okay.
You got it handy there? Let's see what, let's see, give a call of a hen turkey. See if this gobbler here responds to it. Dale's going to be using a call here that he uses in the spring in calling turkeys in the wild. He's puffing up his feathers. Now, why is he doing that, Vic?
He's starting to strut, I would say. But
Gets a little excited when he hears that hen. Now, he probably won't gobble for us, will he?
I doubt it.
Well, Dale, you have that gobble down in pretty good shape. Why don't you lay a gobble on us?
We'll do our best.
There he goes.
Now, why did he gobble back?
Well,
Is he antagonized, or?
that may be a challenge to him, yes.
Wow, that's great. There's a Michigan wild turkey strutting. We have live and in living color here, red, white, and blue, a domestic turkey. Gobbling, fantastic. Of course, in the spring is when we hunt wild turkeys in Michigan.
Correct.
We're going to have you back. Give us some tips on turkey hunting and turkey calling. Very, very interesting. The Michigan wild turkey. That's our wildlife sketch. Now let's go over to talk to a fellow who has some primitive weapons that they used to use to shoot turkeys like this in the colonial days. Muzzleloading rifles. They've played an important part in history. And like the wild turkey, they're coming back. Right, Pa Keeler?
You're right, you are. They sure are.
Pa, you're from Eaton Rapids, and you're really the dean of muzzleloader rifle builders and users. And you're in the Muzzleloading Association. You write an article every month in Michigan Out of Doors, Pa's Powder Horn.
That we do.
And boy, do you look the part. What is this you have on?
Well, that typical buckskins that a French voyageur would have worn back in the up to about 1830 or 40.
Would they have been green like that?
Yeah, more than likely. Green or brown or whatever color they happen to come out. It depends on what they dyed them, of course. Green and the fringe kind of helped you hide out. And this was made out of a Hudson Bay blanket.
This wool jacket.
Yeah.
You wear this out hunting?
Yeah, well, you can wear it hunting. It kind of takes care of the blaze orange thing.
Sure. What about this knife here?
Well, that's patch cutter. It deer horn handle and
Did you make this yourself?
yeah.
Well,
The most of the stuff you build yourself.
most of what you're wearing you built?
Yeah.
What about your hat?
Well, not hardly that.
Okay,
Although,
but that's a traditional type hat that they would have worn
the
back
black
in the-
hat would have been worn back in that type of country.
Okay, well now to get into that powder pouch years and all, let's work into that through these guns. First of all, let's talk about briefly some of these that you have. This one, an octagonal barrel here, a percussion cap
Yeah,
that you'd set right there.
yeah, 50 caliber. It's a typical half-stock plains rifle like would have been used back in the old days and being used around here. There's more of this type of a gun being hunted with than any other.
Our Michigan muzzleloaders are using these types.
Yeah.
Okay, and here we're down to a very interesting shotgun or rifle. What is it?
It is. It's both.
Both.
It's a typical gun made about 1850 in Ionia, Michigan by a T. Smith. And at that time in Michigan, when you went hunting, you didn't know whether you was going to run into a bear or a bird, so you loaded it for both of them. And an awful lot of the Michigan guns were combination guns. They just sort of served a double purpose.
And very ornate also. There's
They
deer?
did dress them up just a bit. Man's name is on the lock here.
Mm-hmm. So this is an original old...
Yeah, that's
Okay, well,
130
that's
years
our
old now.
shotgun and rifle. And of course, here's how you...
That's about as far as you could get from the old one. That one's just partially completed. A friend of mine is building that out to my place, and he kind of bogged down for the summer, but he's going to be back at it pretty soon. And this is where you want the kind of a rifle, if you want to get what you want, you got to start out with a block of wood and build it. Kit, they're fine. There's lots of people can use kits, but if you want a specialized gun, the way you get it is
Build it yourself.
build it yourself, right?
Okay, now let's get down here to this last one, which is the old flintlock rifle.
This is a flintlock. It's
Older than the percussion cap.
oh yeah, much older. This type of lock lasted 300 years and didn't go out of style until 1835, and then they kept building trade guns, and the snake on the other side of this designates a trade gun.
Oh, okay.
That's they used those a lot, and they traded the Indians, traded the trappers this type of a gun.
Okay, now what you do with this type of rifles, you
Yeah,
pull
you
it back,
pull it back, put the flint in here, close this, then you pull that trigger, and it hits that and makes a spark.
and you'll see the sparks, right like that. How about doing that for us? Load
Well,
this up for us.
we can. I assume you don't want it loaded, really.
Not with a
No,
ball or
okay.
any pellets.
In this pouch, you would have everything you need to load it with. This is a typical old original powder flask made out of horn. The charger holds about 2 drams, which would be a light 20 gauge load,
You put a little powder right there.
and that's black powder.
Okay. We'll drop that down in the barrel. That's what you do out in the woods.
Put that in the barrel and put the cover back on, of course. Then you would dig in, if you was going to load it with shot, you would put this wad in there.
Drop a wad down in there, and,
That would go in tight, and we'll leave that part out.
and your ball on top of that. Okay, just
Yeah.
sort of a cork type wad.
If you were going to use shot again, your shot would be in this type of a flask. You can drop a load.
bird
It's
shot.
just typical bird shot. That's right.
Now, how does that stay in the barrel?
Well, you have another little thin wad you put on top
Oh,
of it.
wad on top of
Yeah,
that, okay.
A little thin card wad.
And now what do you do for the rifle? You drop a
The
lead
rifle,
ball?
you would put a lead ball, and you'd use some patching material. That's where the patch knife comes in. This has had a piece or two cut out of it where you've pressed it down on there and cut a round hole.
How about putting that powder charge in the pan?
Okay. Alrighty, we'll jar it down a little bit.
Now
This is a priming horn. This is fine powder.
Okay, you drop the powder in the pan. What's going to happen is the flint is going to spark, ignite the powder in the pan, go through this little hole that you clean out, ignite the powder in there.
And this is
Shoot
a
it off.
touch hole pick that you usually keep it clear. Now you understand that you're like a temperamental youngster. When you're showing them off, they don't always do it.
Well, let's see what happens. Pa Keeler firing the old flint. Wow. That's the way.
It worked that time.
How many deer have you gotten with a muzzleloader?
8 mule deer, or whitetails, a mule deer and an antelope.
Wow, that's
So
great.
I've
Pa
had that for
Keeler.
the last 15 years.
Pa, I have a recipe right now to show you that might go along with your garb and something you can eat out in the woods. Jerky, have you ever had it?
Yeah, I've eaten jerky.
Okay, well, let's go right now to a recipe that you don't do over an open fire. You do it at home, right in the oven. Use a few ingredients: garlic salt, lemon pepper, soy sauce, Worcestershire sauce. Of course, you can use venison or beef, but whatever you use, cut all the fat off before you start. And I have 2 basic suggestions. Pick a cut of meat that has as little fat as possible. Round steak is perfect. The other suggestion is to use a good piece of meat. I mean, why take a bad piece of meat and try to eat it dried? You know, you're not exactly working on a big improvement in texture and taste, so you'll be a lot farther ahead to start with as good a piece of meat as you can. Now, I know what you've heard about the Indians and pioneers stripping the long, stringy pieces of flank into long, stringy pieces of jerky, then drying it and having a long, stringy piece of string-like, dried, stringy meat. I mean, how good could that be? So try this. Instead of cutting the meat with the grain, cut across it. It'll be a lot easier to chew when it's dried, and it'll taste better, too. Now the marinade you only need for 15 or 20 minutes. You can leave the meat in there longer, it won't hurt. It's a fairly strong combination. If you get tired of trying to pour enough out of the little drip tops they put on soy sauce and Worcestershire sauce, pop them off so you can maybe get 1/8 of a cup. Equal parts of Worcestershire and soy sauce will do the job. The soy sauce that you're going to marinate this meat in contains water, soybean extracts, salt, and corn syrup. So it has a lot of flavor and actually adds some sweetness to the meat. And the Worcestershire sauce, well, if you read the ingredients, it also contains soy sauce that's made from molasses. Along with some other spices, it contains more corn syrup, salt, garlic, and vinegar. That's a real combination. If you're tempted to taste it, well, it's going to make you pucker right up. But after 15 minutes, that meat, you can leave it overnight if you wish, but 15 minutes will do. Lay the strips of meat on an oven rack. Stretch them out so they're as thin as possible. This will help them dry more evenly. And before you start the drying, before you pop these in the oven, add a couple of dried spices. You can put on what you wish, you can experiment, try different ingredients, but a good basic one is garlic salt. And one that I especially like is lemon pepper, also sold as lemon peel. Now, lemon pepper is a mixture of salt, pepper, onion, sugar, garlic, celery seed, lemon oil, and citric acid. So you're actually putting on quite a few spices and flavorings right here. The heavy dose of salt in the marinade and in the spices helps preserve the jerky. It's almost a pickling process in some ways. Put your spices on both sides and then into the oven. I put a cookie sheet underneath to catch the drips, and you can carry both of these right into the oven. The dripping only occurs initially. From there on, it dries out and evaporates into the air. Remember, we're not cooking this. We're just drying it at low heat, so it's a very simple cleanup operation. Turn your oven no higher than 200 degrees. 175 is best. That's actually just warm on most ovens. But leave the door cracked at the top, like when you're broiling. We don't want to cook the meat. We want it to dry out. Leaving a ventilation space lets the moisture out of the oven, so it dries it rather than cooks it. It takes about 10 to 12 hours if you do it right. And what do you do with that leftover marinade? Well, you can use it again. Put it back into a bottle and label it. You can use it to marinate steaks or other meats, or use it as Worcestershire sauce that has a little extra soy. This will keep in the refrigerator for quite a while, so you can use it over and over. And as I said, experiment with jerky. Try smoking it in a home smoker to add a little different flavor. Try different spices. But I think if you try this recipe, you'll be pleasantly surprised. It'll keep for quite a while in the refrigerator if you store it in Ziploc bags. It's a simple recipe, and here's a toast, hoping that your jerky, not turkey, it's the right day, wrong meat, but I hope your jerky turns out as good as this. And here on this turkey day, we're going to have a little jerky, Pa. I want you to try this out. This was some I just made last evening. See what you think.
I'll try a chunk of it. It is good.
Good, you like it?
Fine.
Tell you what, here's your Thanksgiving gift.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you, Pa Keeler. That's our jerky recipe. And now we're going to find out about some trophy fish that have been taken in Michigan on our trophy report. Brook trout is the smallest trout species, but many consider it to be the scrappiest of all fish, pound for pound. Paul Savage from Portland used a MEP spinner in the Presqu'île River in the UP to entice this trophy 2.5-pound brookie into striking last spring. Another trout stream resident, especially in the early spring, is the red horse sucker. Not an esteemed game fish, but now in the Michigan record book at 9 pounds for the state record. This 6-pound 4-ouncer was taken from the Paw Paw River by Eugene O'Reilly from Hartford. The granddaddy of the rough fish is the carp. This one, nearly 30 pounds, went for canned corn on a hook. Robert Hamilton from Grand Haven caught it near home in Spring Lake. Until recently not considered much of a sport fish, anglers are realizing they fight as hard as any game fish, and they're not that easy to catch. Now, this is the epitome of game fish to much of the U.S., the largemouth bass. And Michigan has its share of good bass waters. Carl Ray from Dayton, Ohio, came up to fish Corey Lake in St. Joseph County, and on October 10th took this nearly 7-pound lunker on a floating Rapala at 10 in the morning. A little MEP spinner that took the 2.5-pound brook trout also attracted this 25-pound northern pike for Dennis Ronning from Belleville, caught in July on the blind sucker flooding in eastern UP. A 25-pound pike is a real prize in any North American waters. Finally, our master angler of the week is Mrs. Jean Martin Walls from Algonac for her 97-pound trophy lake sturgeon. A night crawler was the magic bait, the magic waters, the St. Clair River. Must have given Gene quite a fight. It's been quite a thrill to land a 6-foot-1-inch fish. Not a common catch. It earned Gene Martin Walls the title of Master Angler, or Master Anglerus, or Mistress Angler. Now let's leave it at Master Angler of the Week. Fishing season is not over by a long shot. I have proof of that right here. I have Bill on the phone from Bale's Sporting Goods down in Saugatuck, Douglas. Bill, you have anybody fishing down in your neck of the woods?
Oh, we got diehards fishing. They're catching fish.
Well, what kind are they catching?
Salmon, steelhead, a few brown trout.
Well, are you fishing in the rivers or are they out in the lake?
Yeah, fishing off the piers and trolling anywhere from shore up to 100 foot of water, top 10 foot. There's plenty of fish. It's just awful cold out there, but not a fish around.
Boy, I bet it's cold. Have you talked to anybody who's gotten their limit?
A guy talked to a guy that went out Monday, and there was 3 of them fishing, and they had 10 fish. So I didn't actually get a limit.
Yeah, it's a good catch anyway. Well, what about up in the river there? Any other fish being caught?
Good northern pike fishing in the river. I fished yesterday morning and got 5. About 2 hours it took me to catch 5 keeper-sized pike.
Well, that's great news. That's some encouragement for Fisherman Bill. Thank you very much. There's only one reason that we aren't having more trophy fish reported. It's not because the fish aren't there, because they are. It's just because fishermen aren't going after them. They're doing other things. Maybe you're interested in doing something else. Muzzle loading, for example. If you want to get some information from Paul Keeler on the Muzzleloading Association, or from Dale Davis on the Michigan Wild Turkey Federation, or you want to give us some suggestions on who to have on the hot seat. We talked to Tom Washington tonight. If you'd like to have someone else on the hot seat, have me fire some questions, send me a letter right here at Michigan Outdoors, Box 1, East Lansing, 48823. And be sure not to miss our show next week, Big Buck Night, right here on Michigan Outdoors. Join me.
Rugged shore and woodlands of the north, its history of copper mines and iron ore, the Great Lakes fisheries. To the farmlands of the southern counties we'll look around again, and all that waits the sportsman in the state of Michigan. And sometimes when the moon brings out the diamonds in the snow, and the stillness of the forest lies encased in Arctic cold, the wind might whisper through the trees, listen if you can, it tells you of the beauty in the state of Michigan.
Satellite